Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. Tonight is it's quite an emotional one for me. I'm going to be telling tales that I learnt when I was a child. My family used to go on camping holidays in the Brecon Beacons, and of course, well, it would often rain. And we would be camping in a farmer's field, and sometimes the farmer would take pity on us and invite us in for dinner in front of the fire. And if we were very lucky, Farmer Evans, gosh, it takes me back. I haven't thought of Farmer Evans for so long. But his aged father, if we were very lucky, would tell us stories, but not if his own grandchildren were there, because they would say, "Shut up, Grandpa." Whereas we would say, "Tell us more stories, tell us more stories." And we'd sit there entranced. And I would often go back to the tent and do drawings and write down what I could. And going through those stories brings them back to me. And it's also made me think about what a story is. And I used to really wonder when I first started telling stories, whether it was the person who wrote the story, who knew the story, who knew what it was about, who set the terms of the story, or it was the person who told the story. But now I have realized that storytelling is something very, very different, and it is the story itself. Well, there are different ways. There are many different ways. You can tell a story which you can make up, and you can tell a story that someone else has made up. And then there are the stories that live. And these stories, well, they get inside your mind. And these stories I'm going to tell tonight, they've been back here for over 30 years. And these are stories that you think, well, maybe the earliest record might be 500 years ago, it might be 100 years ago, it might be 1,000 years ago. But if it's 500 years ago, it could easily be 1,000 years. And if it's 1,000 years, it could be 2,000 or 3,000, or it could stretch further back. And the story is never the same. It is similar. And the way really to tell the story is to relax and let the story speak and let the characters speak. And sometimes they say quite different things. And sometimes it means something quite different. And I've come to the conclusion that really the stories they are their own thing. I don't want to say they're like a virus, but perhaps they're like a sort of spirit, and it's inside and it talks. I'm going to start with the story of Linni Bin Bac, the Lady of the Lake. But before I start, I'm just going to have a little drink of Blandy's 10-year-old Malmsey from Madeira. So long ago in a valley, there was a farming family, and the farm was not prosperous. The farm was hard work, and the family had 4 sons, and the first 3 sons were hard-working sons. But as luck would have it, each one of them married a girl whose family had a farm that needed him. So the old couple were left with their youngest son, Thomas. Thomas was a strange lad. He did not really like working on the farm, or did not really take to it. And at the same time, he found it difficult to speak to people who didn't talk a lot. And, well, he didn't seem to be looking for or finding a girl. And, well, normally you wouldn't have thought, normally, let's put it this way, if you've got a boy, a man who's got a farm, who's going to inherit a farm, there are girls that will come up and talk to him. But Thomas had a bit of a reputation, and girls perhaps didn't fancy marrying someone who wasn't going to be a good farmer living high up on the hills. Well, all that is except for Mary, and, well, no one wanted to marry Mary. And Thomas would spend a lot of time dreaming when he should have been working. And he used to go up to the lake, and he used to sit there. And one day when he was sitting there, he saw a very strange thing. He saw a girl sitting on the water. He'd never seen a girl up there, and he'd never seen one sitting on water. He waved at her, and she stood up and walked towards him. And she was very, very beautiful. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and she smiled expectantly, and he searched for words, and suddenly, would you like a sandwich? And he took out of his pocket a piece of stale bread with a piece of stale cheese in it, thinking what an idiot he was, but he was there now, and he'd started the conversation, and he handed it over, and she looked at it, and she said, no, thank you, but maybe tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow then, he said. And she walked off and disappeared under the water. The next day he was there, and this time he'd wrapped the sandwich, and he'd made a bit more effort out of it, and put a piece of spinach in with the cheese. And he held it out, and she looked at it and said, maybe tomorrow. Well, he tried hard, and the next day he brought some biscuits, and she said, maybe tomorrow. And then he begged and cajoled, and finally got a bit of money from his parents and went to the baker in town and bought a penny bun. And he thought that she would want, but maybe tomorrow. So that evening he asked his mother to teach him to make bread, and she was very pleased because her hands were all rheumatic and it was hard for her to make bread, and she did it every day. So he made a loaf of bread, and he did nothing else to it, but he took it. She looked at it, she smelt it, and she smiled and said, thank you. And then she looked at him, smiling as though she was expecting him to say something, and, well, he didn't think, will you marry me? Suddenly came out from nowhere, out of his mouth, and he felt terribly ashamed, but she smiled and said, I will. I love you. He said, I love you too, she said. But we must ask my father's permission. Your father? He said, yes, she said, come back tomorrow, but listen to me. Listen to me, you must look at the feet. She had very pretty feet, but he didn't know what she was talking about. The next day, he came back, and as he stood by the lake, out from the middle came a great man, a man with an enormous beard, and he started to walk over, and as he walked over, first out came the beautiful girl. But then out she came again, and then out she came again, and there were 3 of them. Oh, you want to marry my daughter? Ah, yes, sir. Marriages with mortals rarely turn out good. But if you do marry her, if you do truly love her, I will give as a dowry all the animals that she can count in one breath. But first, to show that you really do love her, which one of my 3 daughters is the one you want to marry? He looked from one to the other, and they were all alike, and he didn't know what to do. And then he remembered, looked to the feet, and he looked to the feet. Then he noticed that one, but only one of them, had a foot that was very slightly tapping on the water. He pointed at her. That's right. That's Nell. All right. You can be married. But if you ever strike her with iron, she will come back and you will never see her again, and she'll bring her dowry with. I'm not going to strike her with iron, he said. And Nell came ashore and took him by the hand. And then she took a deep, deep breath and started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And as she counted, out of the lake came fine oxen, came sheep and cows and goats and geese, until she'd finished counting and there was an enormous farmyard of animals. They followed them meekly back to the farm. And he told his parents this was the girl he was going to marry. And no one understood how he had married such a beautiful girl, or how he could become such a prosperous farmer, for all the animals thrived and multiplied. Five, 6, 7 children later, it was harder with so many children, and time took a little longer. And maybe he was a bit thoughtless, or maybe he wasn't. But one day, as they were preparing to go to market, and he thought Nell should be hurrying up a bit and getting on with the horses, he said, "Look, can you hurry up, Nell?" And rather than passing her the horse's bridle, he threw it towards her. And the bit that was made of iron struck her arm. All the blood left her face, and she turned and said, "I must go, but it was an accident. I didn't mean to. It wasn't a..." "It doesn't matter," she said. And she walked off to the lake, and as she walked, all the animals that she had brought followed her, and they went under the lake with her. And though he would go many times and stand by the lake, he never saw her again. Though their children would go, and sometimes she would come and speak to them. And even today, the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren who still live on the farm, well, sometimes the little children will see a lady on the lake coming to them.